Good Choices, a holistic conversation about dance, art, and life with Sabine Parzer. Hi, everybody. So, continuing with my solo podcast series on the topic of healing, embodiment, transformation, and integration. And this is the integration part 3. But I want to, of course, mention the other two aspects of it and also talk a little bit more about what I think healing can look like or what healing can be supported by through holistic dance. So I talked quite a bit in the first two parts about how healing can be viewed in the different, or that there's different views on what healing means in through different fields or through the perspective of different fields, and that we in dance, in bodywork, in somatic movement practices, in body therapies, that we like to start with the body first, and we like to keep the body in the focus as a way of becoming whole, as a way of reconnecting to or re-establishing our connections with a natural way of being, an organic way of being, a way of being that has a connection, is integrated with our analytical, critical thinking minds, but is not dominated by it, or is not singularly, anxiously driven by thought, but is embodied, is connected. And I mean, the reason why I talk about it and the reason why I've spent my life investigating this is because I truly believe that dance, movement, and touch is so necessary and is so helpful in this process. And I think we all know it. I think the most one of the most critical moments in my life, in my career, was, so I tell you this personal story, is that when I transitioned from being a professional dancer on stage in Chicago and in New York, being a choreographer, to investigate what else is there, or is there more spiritual or more socially engaged way of using all of that I learned in my beautiful time as a dancer at my college, and also in the rehearsal studios and on stage. And in this transition, I started working at a rehabilitation center. And one of the things that was so amazing to me is that no matter how severely injured or traumatized the patients were, I felt that there was always a healthy part that was looking for connection. That was looking for movement, that was looking for um, healing, pretty much. And however conscious or unconscious that was for each patient in that rehab center, we all have that. The body loves to move. The body loves to be touched. There's very few people who do not like a simple, respectful touch. Of course, the topic of touch is huge in terms of overstepping boundaries and abusive touch. But let's not forget that there is an innate yearning for all of us to be close to people, to be close to somebody, to be held. And so in my time as a dance therapist at this rehab center, I really could taste that yearning, or that sort of organic development, or this organic reconnecting that people under severe circumstances and with severe traumatic experiences were trying to reestablish in order to become more functional again, in order to recover. So, and it doesn't need those super traumatic transformations. I talked about transformations in part 2, for us to recognize that, but sometimes or oftentimes it will need sort of a big life crisis for us to recognize, oh, I really need to work with my body, or I need to work with my body in a different way, or I want to connect with myself in a different way to become more whole, to become more empowered, to become more authentic, to become more of who I am also. So I'd like to share a little bit of what I think dance, movement, and touch can offer, especially when they're done in a conscious and conscious way with a healing intention. So we can work with relieving physical tension. We work with activation and regeneration. We work with creating awareness for our body tonus. We regulate the energy and nervous system. We foster sensibility in connecting with ourselves, with our larger environment, and with a partner. We develop touch qualities. We open our senses. We develop receptivity and listening skills. We integrate embodiment on a cellular somatic level. We develop a link between the unconscious and the conscious body. So the list goes on. You can read more on my website also. There's a lot that we invite and a lot that we nourish in this work. And again, I'm speaking, of course, through the lens of holistic dance, because that's what I'm offering. But I also always want to say, I feel like there's many modalities out there, and there's also many modalities that do not necessarily have to be guided by somebody else. Of course, it's nice because if there's a teacher who has more experience than you, of course, you will have a frame, you will have invitations, entrances, you will have some expertise by somebody else. But the body mind is also really nourished, or really lives also by our individual inquiry. It lives off of our own questions towards what do I need, what do I want, how do I want to move, who do I want to move with, where do I want to move, what do I want to express. And so I often feel like it's good to name these tools, or it's good to, of course, name also the frame that I'm working with, or the forms that I have chosen. And of course, I'm also here to promote them. But I also feel like so much of this healing process is about bringing our attention to our own individual needs. All right. So if we're talking about integration as the third aspect of this healing process, embodiment being what I would name the ongoing practice of tuning in, of arriving, of developing our physical and somatic skills. Transformation being this sort of intense, densifying process of letting go and in between, and arrival of the new, transforming, changing shape. Then I do feel like the third part of it is integration to this process. And I think it's a part that often gets lost, or it has gotten lost in some trainings, or in some catharsis oriented processes that sort of focus on the Big Bang, I would say. I don't mind a nice catharsis myself. I don't mind a beautifully expressive transformation process. But I do think that integration is is necessary. It's not just important, it's necessary. And as dance teachers, or as holistic dance pedagogues, for me, it's important to pass it on to my teachers, but it's also important for me to guide participants into that, and reminding them that that's also their continuous work after a retreat or after a session. So integration in many ways is digesting, sorting, revisiting, shaping, reclaiming, and redefining. It's I've I've gone through this process of getting somewhere new, of letting something go, of going through the scary of I don't know, and something new is emerging, or something has has let go of, or something visionary comes, something new is emerging. Or in some ways, maybe also I found a new identity, or I found can be a new partner, or it can be a new profession, or it could be a new place to live. I talked about that in the transformation part, where I feel like transformation can be big processes, but they can also be ongoing, very subtle processes. So integration is very much about sort of weaving in the different parts. It's revisiting, it's sorting, it's almost like you're swimming still in the elements of all of these transformational processes. It's also, and I think that's really important, it's also what do I make of this? So especially when we go to retreats or when we're guided through a process, if I'm coming home, what do I make of this? Or what does my creative body wants to make of it? And I feel like that's something that each of us have to sort of find, or each of us have to sort of listen for. And what I can share from my perspective is that I usually don't know. I usually don't know what wants to come out or in what form this integration happens, but I do know that I have to give it space. I have to give it space to let it unfold. So it might sometimes be that I write, or it might be that I lie in the sun outside at the lake and kind of do sort of a half dreaming, half awake sort of, surfing inside of my body, so a somatic surfing session, or sometimes I draw, or sometimes my integration time is by sharing my experiences with a dear friend. It's very interesting because I feel like in many ways my integration time is something that I'm doing right now, because I did this beautiful process, teaching, holding the space for transforming bodies in motion, 10 days ago. And then I was just also on a craniosacral retreat with David Kramitza, who is part of the visionary craniosacral work of Hugh Milne of the Institute. And it was a program, or it was a course about the brain and trauma. And David was just very articulate. And we worked not only studying the brain and studying trauma, but we also worked with hands-on with the different parts of the brain. And it was so inspiring. And at the same time, my brain was integrating so much information, both from the anatomy and from what I was sort of experiencing and holding in my teaching before. And so right now, I feel like my integration time is actually talking about these aspects. So doing this podcast series is a part of my integration. So yeah, again, I think it's important to not be super high on our expectations, what this integration might look like, or to kind of assume or pressure ourselves to have an outcome. But it might very well be that there is something that wants to be created from this process. And again, it's depending on who you are, and depending on where your flow is. It could be cooking a beautiful meal all the while you're processing these steps in between that need processing. Um, yeah, I think I cannot. Or let's put it this way. I want to talk about the mandala just for a moment. as a quality or also as a symbol of integration. So the mandala, um, meanwhile, is quite well known. It's quite sort of arrived in popular culture, but it's really a symbol that comes from Buddhist practice, Buddhist tradition. And I'd like to read something by Lama Tsultrim Leone, who is this fabulous Buddhist teacher, also somebody I had the great honor of meeting last year. And she has studied Jung a lot, and she works with different Jungian practices. And so what she writes in her book, actually Wisdom Rising. So she writes about Sigge Jung's contribution to the mandala, and then I'll talk about what that means in terms of integration. So self with the capital S, self as used by Dr. Jung, referred not to the egocentric self as it is used in Buddhism, but rather to the self as the fully individuated person. He saw the self as the revelation of an individual's full potential integrated with the person's emotional shadow or disowned parts. The egocentric self he saw as the center of conscious, whereas the self he saw was the center of the whole being, including the ego, consciousness, and the unconscious shadow. The self was the unification of the conscious and unconscious mind, and the state of integration was symbolized by the circle divided into 4 quadrants, which he called the mandala. The self he believed was whole at birth, but it was lost in the development of the ego differentiation necessary to establish oneself in the external world, usually occurring in the first half of life. The second half of life Dr. Jung viewed as a return to the self through the process of what he called individuation, a conscious discovery or recovery of the psychic nucleus of oneself. This journey to individuation often began with a wounding of the personality, requiring a reconnection with the greater self to heal. The mandala, according to Dr. Jung, could play a key role in this process of egoic differentiation and wounding. His work with himself and later with clients, drawing their own mandalas, heralded the entrance of the mandalas into the Western usage. Lots of beautiful words. So integration is really something that in many ways that we do, or that our psyche does, and I would expand it also to the body mind, when given time. Again, I talked about this earlier. Our bodies and our body mind are built for regulation. We're built for homeostasis. So when there has been a big transformation, there is an internal sense of wanting to integrate this. There's an internal regulating system, and this is what Jung calls the self, which is an archetype, that often unspectacularly, my favorite word, puts the pieces in together in a new way, in an individuated way, so that we can function in the world. We have become a new version of ourselves, or a new aspect of ourselves has become embodied. And this process of integration can be nourished or can be supported by either drawing a mandala, or by looking at mandalas, or by walking a mandala or meditating on it, or simply recognizing or sensing that there is something in us that unifies, that brings together all of the different parts of ourselves. Quite miraculous, actually. If we look at churches or different temples, there's always symbols, even if it's not Buddhist. even in our Christian or Catholic churches, there will always be something, some circular form or some windows that have similar shapes um, of unification or of bringing together. So integration is really about this process. And if we have a little bit of a sense of self or a little bit of a sense, oh, I know I've gone through some changes in my life before, and I know that if I do this or this or this or this, then it calms my nervous system, or it helps me to digest, or it helps me simply to sort things out. And again, these can be so many different things. It can be sleeping. Honestly, like some of my best integration times I've done during sleeping. Oftentimes I will sleep. I have these major naps after teaching. Usually on Tuesday, if I teach until Sunday, usually on Tuesday afternoon, I will sleep for like 3 hours in the afternoon and do deep processing. So again, it could be a creative output. It could be deep rest. Um, it could be, yeah, it could be anything really. I think the main aspect of it is, or it could be, that's what I wanted to say. It could be also supported by getting a private session or getting a single session, a bodywork session. So having a hands-on session after having gone through a deep process can also be helpful. I think what's important when we recognize that we're in an integration process is to not start something new or to not shift again into another really intense process right away. And I think that's one of the issues that I take with some of my colleagues also, or also with the lack of recognition that integration is so important, is that the more time we give ourselves to integrate, the more sustainable those changes that we were going for in the transformation will be. If you move too quickly, if you pass through this point of integration too quickly, then our nervous systems and our brains simply don't have the time to rewire, to really manifest, or to really anchor that beautiful new aspect of ourselves. I recently just heard that our brains, after an intense experience, transformational experience, a retreat, um, the brain plasticity is of course heightened after a transformational process. So depending on how long your retreat was, or how long this or how intense this transformational process was, you could say between 5 or 10 days afterwards, your brain plasticity, so the ability for your brain to adapt or to rewire new connections or to create a new pattern or to, become a new version of yourself is just much more ready. It's much more alive. It's much more available to us. And that's the integration time. All right. So this kind of concludes my big output of these three processes. Of course, there's way more to say. I would like to finish with a poem that I found, and I will read it in English first and then in German, because it was actually written in German, and it's by Peter Meyer. I am one of those Japanese bowls that were made a long time ago. I have a few cracks. They were filled with gold. That's what they used to use when a bowl was broken, not hiding the cracks. It made them shine. And so now every wound is visible of every past injury, and it is visible to every eye. I am no longer what I was. But the collector recognizes all these uncertain lines make me more beautiful and more valuable justify a higher price. I am like one of those Japanese balls. I was made a long time ago. I have some visible cracks. Look how golden they shine. Ich bin wie eine dieser japanischen Schalen, die vor langer Zeit gemacht wurden. Ich habe ein paar Risse. Die wurden mit Gold gefüllt. Das benutzte man damals, wenn eine Schale zerbrochen war. Das versteckte nicht die Risse, das brachte sie zum Glänzen. Und so ist jetzt jede Wunde sichtbar, von jeder vergangenen Verletzung. Und es ist für jedes Auge sichtbar. Ich bin nicht mehr, was ich war. Doch der Sammler erkennt, all diese unsicheren Linien machen mich schöner und wertvoller, rechtfertigen einen höheren Preis. Ich bin wie einer dieser japanischen Schalen, wurde vor langer Zeit gemacht, habe einige sichtbare Risse. Sieh nur, wie golden sie glänzen. Thank you.
If you would like to know more about holistic dance and the Holistic Dance Institute, please visit us at our website www.holistic-dance.at. Holistic dance is an invitation to transformation through dance, movement, and touch. It was founded by me, Sabine Parzer, in 2010. It is a mix of different methods, a dynamic cross-method approach from dance pedagogical, dance and body therapeutic, systemic and holistic methods. We offer authentic movement, integrative contact improvisation, somatics and applied anatomy, improvisation, ecosomatics, and many more elements. I offer holistic dance workshops, I offer single sessions, I offer teachers trainings, embodiment trainings, advanced teachers tracks, year groups, and retreats. I would be very happy to see you at one of our events. And if you have any questions, please write me an email.